In this video, we're going to walk through Lesson 2 in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy's English Composition course. In our first video, we looked at a common problem in modern writing courses, namely that students are asked to write about topics that they're not interested in, and they usually share their writing with readers who are also not interested in the topics or in their writing. And we looked at how this is different from the everyday conversation that we all take pleasure in. In our normal daily communication, we talk about topics that interest us, and we seek out people who we know or believe are interested in what we'd like to talk about. But in writing classes, we don't do that, and we often get frustrated and discouraged in writing. And to study the art of composition well, we need to eliminate those problems and find a way to study writing with pleasure. And we talked about how we're going to do that a little bit in this course, with the goal being to help you express ideas in writing clearly, effectively, and with pleasure. In this second lesson, we talk about or introduce a topic that's always important to students, namely, where should we get ideas from to write about? The title of Lesson 2 is Sources of Ideas. Many students struggle to write because they simply don't know what to say. And we should answer the question, where can we go for ideas, or what can we do to improve our ability to write by building a broader and broader base of ideas that we can draw on when we write. So in Lesson 2, we'll study this brief topic of sources of ideas. Let's read it together, discuss a few of the items as we go along, and then keep moving on. We read, "We must have ideas before we can express them. We must have ideas before we can express them. And there are three sources from which ideas arise." And just to make sure you understand what this idea of ideas is. In the world, all of the things that God has created, whether visible or invisible, whether material or immaterial, all things that have been created, we refer to as objects. Objects are outside of us, objects. When we learn about any object, we form an idea in our minds, a mental image or symbol in our minds that represents some object that exists outside of our minds. And that mental image or symbol is an idea. And communication is the sharing of ideas. So we must have ideas before we can express them. And there are three sources, the author says, from which ideas arise. Three sources of ideas. We may gain them from experience. That's source number one, experience. We may recombine them into new forms by imagination. We may recombine them into new forms by imagination. In other words, we can imagine or develop new ideas from existing ideas. That's the work of the imagination. So we have experience as the first source of ideas, and second, imagination. And third, we may receive them from others through the medium of language, either by conversation or by reading. So three sources of ideas that we're going to need to learn to pay attention to, and to also try to control in our lives and give attention to by taking action and seeking to develop, as I said, a broad base and rich treasury of ideas from which we can draw when it's time to write or speak. Again, the first source is our experience. The second source is imagination. And the third source is by learning, by reading and speaking and gathering ideas from conversation with others. All right, three sources of ideas. The lesson goes on to say every day we add to our knowledge through our senses. We add to our knowledge through our senses. Our senses are always working, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, feeling. We're always perceiving different effects in the world around us. We're always gathering information, always receiving new images, new smells, new sounds, new feelings, and so on. And every day we're adding to our knowledge, to our ideas, through our senses. We see and hear and do, and thus, through experience, we acquire ideas by means of our senses about different things. And this is included under the first source, which was experience. The author says, by far, the greater part of expression has to do with ideas that have originated in this way. The first chapter or first part of this course is concerned with the expression of ideas gained through experience. Okay? We may, however, think about things that have not actually occurred. We may allow our minds to picture a football game that we have not seen, or plan a story about a boy who never actually existed. Nearly everyone takes pleasure in such an exercise of the imagination. The second part of this course has to do with the expression of ideas of this kind, ideas developed through the work of our imagination. And thirdly, we add to our knowledge through the medium of language. Through conversation and reading, we learn what others think. And it is often of value for us to restate these ideas, to share these ideas, to pass them on. The expression of ideas so acquired is treated in the third part of this course. Okay, so you can see that as we get into the art of composition, first of all, as we learned in lesson 1, we're going to focus on topics that are of interest to you, that you can write about with some interest and attention, even passion, about the topics you write about. And secondly, we're going to work to develop and build a body of ideas that we can draw from when we wish to communicate something, right? And in this lesson, in lesson 2, we learned that there are 3 basic sources of ideas, each of which we're going to study in this course. The first one is experience. Information we gather from our daily experience, through our senses, through our different trials and the events in our lives, all of these different opportunities we have to enter into different circumstances, to see how people and things work and act, to gather experiences and build a body of ideas that there's no way to develop except over time through our life's experience. The second way is by imagination, by actually creating as a poet. This is what ancient poetry was, creating or inventing ideas. And then thirdly, by learning of the ideas from others, from their experience and from their imagination and from their conversations and studies. So you can see how this work of collecting ideas from all of these different sources, not only from our own experiences and our own imagination and our own studies, but also from the experiences, imagination, and studies of others who can share them with us, who we can also seek them out by trying to develop and gather a greater store of ideas. So you can see that one of the key elements or habits that we have to develop if we wish to become effective writers is to build and develop a treasury of ideas that we can then share with others through our conversation or in our writing. And we're going to focus on that at different points in the course as we go along. Just to make it a point that applies to all of your studies. Okay, you can look at your studies and say things like, when would I ever need to use history? When would I ever need to use algebra? Why do I need to study the catechism? Why do I need to read? The answer is because the more and the richer collection of ideas that you can develop over time, the more you have available when it comes time to write something. Think, for example, if you are trying to write a letter or a story to give some kind of moral lesson. It sure would be helpful to know all of the proverbs in the Bible, wouldn't it? It sure would be helpful to know all of Aesop's fables, so you could pull examples from the fables you've studied, or Theophrastus's characters, or to have a great knowledge of literature that you can draw from different events and scenes and characters and stories. And you could draw from all of that to make your writing rich and pleasant and beautiful. That's one of the reasons to study, and one of the greatest reasons to study is to collect ideas. One of the reasons why travel can be valuable. Ancient poets used to travel for the sake of collecting ideas, collecting different visions and experiences of certain scenes or certain geographical figures like mountains or seas or valleys, things that they would be able to take with them and use in their writing. So the main purpose and drive in learning is not necessarily that there's some practical professional use for every study, but simply to build a body of knowledge and ideas that you can draw from when you write about topics that are of interest to you. Okay. Also, as your audience changes, it's helpful to be able to pull different examples or illustrations from sources that may interest your audience. So having a broad base of ideas gathered over time allows you to communicate effectively with a broader and more diverse audience of hearers or readers when you speak or write. So sources of ideas, 3 main sources. And to become a good writer, we need to understand that gathering ideas is sort of a foundation on which we can build good writing skills in the future. So lesson 2, sources of ideas. I hope that's a helpful introduction to this lesson. I encourage you to read it on your own. If you have any questions about these things, please contact me, and we're going to keep moving on in our study of English composition. God bless.